Good evening and a very warm welcome to the panel discussion on urban development of Hooghly heritage landscape. My name is Astrid Weger. I'm the director of Goethe Institute Max Müller-Barber in Calcutta. And this panel is part of the Hooghly Heritage Hub, a cooperation between the UNI clusters in Delhi and Calcutta, the European National Institutes for Culture. The main goal of the Hooghly Heritage Hub project is to create awareness on cultural heritage and Indo-European histories along the river Hooghly, where Indian culture blends with the built heritage of former European settlements. The Hooghly Heritage Hub has a strong focus on the contemporary aspects of cultural heritage. This panel in particular focuses on urban development and the readaptive use of built heritage. And it is a truly international panel, including speakers from Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. The speakers will present case studies as to how reuse and heritage-led planning is a tried and tested solution, which has worked very well to revive other great waterfront cities around the world. These case studies their input may become fruitful for preparing a creative reuse-led plan for the future development of the Hooghly heritage landscape. The panel has been conceived by Professor Monish Chakraborty, who will also function as a moderator today. Let me briefly introduce him. Monish Chakraborty is an architect and urban planner. He is one of the leading conservation architects whose works has been widely published in national and international journals and media. He has authored various books on architecture and conservation, and he is currently the head of School of Architecture and Planning at Sister Nivedita University in Calcutta. He has worked on the nomination dossier of Shantiniketan for World Heritage Site inscription, which is under consideration by UNESCO. And he has received the UNESCO Asia Pacific Heritage Award of Distinction in 2016 for the conservation of St. Olaf Church. He has also been conferred with the Society Interiors Honours Award and the Sutanuti Honours Award for 2 decades of architectural conservation advice and practice in Calcutta and India. Professor Chakraborty, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Astrid. Thank you. And thank you to all who have gathered together in such large numbers. Thank you, all the participants, to this very important workshop on Hooghly heritage, the urban development prospects of this particular area. I would like to mention a few words before. Hooghly was the waterway of truly global significance, which has attracted many merchants and missionaries from Asia, Europe, and elsewhere, somewhat similar to our kind of lineup of people that we managed to put them together for this very important work. And with the center of global history. From here, the 16th century successive external powers like the Portuguese, the Mughals, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Danish were drawn to the banks of the river and housed their trading posts and settlements. The Hooghly came to be integrated into a network of different cultures and regions, and at least until the turn of the 20th century, was renowned across the world. This unique cultural landscape, which is a melting pot of several cultures, can still be traced in the erstwhile trading posts and settlements. That's still a large part of their heritage buildings and places, and still can be traced back in Serampore for the Danish, in Chandannagor for the French, in Chinsura for the Dutch, in Bandel for the Portuguese. Nowhere else in the world is a more concentrated zone of built heritage, witnessing about the commercial and cultural interaction between the East and the West from the time of early European trading, colonization, colonialism in Asia. With the changing course of the river, of course, decline in port activities and jute industry, and change in the political dynamics, the riverfront was neglected and suffered. Redundant warehouses and the jute mills water walks, the vernacular architecture, the temples, the ghats are today somewhat in a dire state. While the grand river facing houses have been incrementally altered and often replaced with concrete blocks beyond recognition. However, these settlements has a spectacular architectural heritage, which is recognized globally as of world importance. Its heritage is a priceless economic, social, cultural, and environmental asset, which can actually drive forward regeneration of this very important area, attracting inward investment, jobs, skills, benefits for all its citizens. So with that as an objective, we has embarked and aimed this conference to get informed about the generic lessons from their specific presentations of varied interventions and projects by the speakers from Germany, Netherlands, UK, and from India. And then work towards preparing an action plan for the Hooghly heritage landscape, which could be actually based on the UNESCO's pronounced recommendation of such historic areas for historic urban landscape approach, which actually talks about preserving the quality of the human environment, enhancing the productive and sustainable use of the urban spaces, while promoting social and functional diversity, and integrating the goals of urban heritage conservation and those of social and economic development. So with this as an objective and an aim, we ventured onto, and we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Frank Eckard from Bauhaus, University of Weimar in Germany, and he's going to talk about Ermshire River, Emscher River of the industrial landscape of the Ruhr area in Germany. And then we have Dr. Brant Ryan, along with Dr. Siddhartha Sen and Neha Doshi, who is going to reimagine the future of Kolkata's jute mills and all the jute mills along the riverbank of the River Hooghly. Dr. Shomin Bandopadhyay from the University of Liverpool, who has been working on this stretch of the Hooghly landscape, will highlight towards a management plan of this area. And Dr. Shikha Jain from Drona in Delhi will speak about learning from Indian cities, Udaipur, Ajmer, and Jaipur. And finally, Dr. Paul Moyes, who practices from his office in Rotterdam and teaches at the Delft University on projects and processes and how he and his country managed to make things happen along their rivers up there. With these words, I would like to say a few words about the procedures that we need to follow. I would, while we invite each of the speakers one by one in more or less in the sequence, I would request all the participants to jot down their thoughts and questions on the question and answer session. There's a box at the bottom of your screen, so that's called Q&A. And if you can put those questions, we can take them up during our question and answer session to follow. I now invite Dr. Eckard, to talk about his the river with the industrial landscape in Germany, and over to Dr. Eckard.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting evening. And I would like to share my screen with you and present on the river Emscher, which is a river in Germany, in a very industrial, formerly very industrial river. And I thought this might be interesting for you as it has undergone a lot of changes, and I want to give you a few insights into how this river has been changing over time. Now, the river today, the source of the river today looks like this, very green, very nice. But only 40 years ago, it was a very dark and dirty river. And most people living alongside this river have never been thinking that this waterline is or was a river at all. So I'm talking about the Emscher River, which goes across from east to west, as you can see here, the biggest metropolitan area in Europe. It still consists about 12 million people, which is for European conditions very large. And as you can see here on the map, it is encaptured by the red areas here, which are all built up areas. So it is still a river which is included into a built up environment. Now, in the 19th century, this was the most strongest rising industrial area, and the river caused a lot of problems because it was flowing through this industrial area very uncontrolled. And this is why at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the river was very much rebuilt in a way so that it would fit into this industrial river. And in fact, this looks not at all anymore as a river, but it was then completely used as a sewage line and lost its character as a river. And some of this construction dam walls are still there, but most of the people seeing them as now no longer necessary. All right, what you can say at the beginning of the 1970s, 1980s, the river looked like this. And as I said before, completely unrecognizable. Now, what happened in the 1970s was that the industry declined in this area very much, as you can see here from the two pictures. Once it was a very strong steel and coal and textile industry, and then it turned over to service and shopping and care industry. So the reason for this river being a sewage system was no longer there. But then the question was, okay, if this river does not serve anymore the industry, what do we do with this river then? And as you can see here from the statistics from one city across alongside the river, this change was very essential and very existential, you can say. Just if you look at the numbers from the people working here in the 1960s, still 60,000 people in the city working in the industry. It completely reduced to 20,000. So people had a complete loss of meaning for this river because the whole landscape, the whole industrial landscape changed. So in former time, this was a postcard saying beautiful Oberhausen, which is the city that I'm just talking about, and it had nothing to offer in terms of heritage. But it was nevertheless seen as beautiful, although it was an industrial river. Now that perspective needed to be changed, that this is really a beautiful and return to something that is a future oriented. And the government here started to introduce a new form of cooperation, a new management, so the so-called Emscher Genossenschaft, Emscher Corporation, looking at water treatment and naturalizing the water lines with this industrial infrastructure, and putting together the green surrounding areas with the blue, the industrial river together, so that it can melt up both areas. Now, this year, after 30 years of investment, this renaturalization has been finished. So 30 years, it's the most costly renaturalization Germany ever did. And the first thing is get the sewage out of the river. So this line, putting all the sewage now underground, out of the river and putting it underground, separating it, was of course the most crucial decision. Nevertheless, as you can see, after 52 kilometers of sewage lines, there's still some sewage line overground, of course. But heavily invested into innovative cleaning systems, I think this has become a real success story. And you can see, okay, all this cement that was there in the riverbed now is taken off, and you see on the left and the right side, you see the difference. It is not easy to get all of the industrial heritage out of it. And so the question was, how can we change the view on this heritage? And one of the idea was to integrate the industrial heritage and that the river get its own flowing run of water again. So naturalizing the river is a crucial point, and also to connect spaces which are related to the river again and making them green. So if you can see now here on the map, you can see now it's not only the Emscher which has been renaturalized, but also it was important to get all the connecting rivers to the Emscher back again, which is another huge challenge to do for the renaturalization. This can only be done with a good, strong management, of course, but also if you take the people living at the river with you. So you can see here a classical form of public participation connected with kind of active participation in restoring the river, getting the people really involved in this project. Now, today, I think the success has been achieved because the river is no longer seen as something dirty, but instead you see animals on it, and people already starting to say that they want to live there, like in this this huge housing complex that has been built here next to a lake here. So today there are three challenges are going on still. One is the reinterpretation of the river as a cultural channel. That is to say, trying to see the river as not only waterline, but as a river of culture. And as they have started to implement a route of culture alongside the river with different attractions. And also for free time and leisure. So to have, to reinterpret the Emscher as a place where you can swim, where you can barbecue, where you can sit, and also and do sports. Cycling is one of the major points here. So have a cycling route alongside the Emscher River. And most important, of course, is seeing the river as an educational space, using, of course, new technologies, so kids can and youth can go there and have information. Adults can go there as well, of course, and get information about history, about water, about nature, and to experience that this is a place of nature. Which for so long has not been the case. So when children went there to be at the river, they did it like on the photo here, but they never had really the idea that this is kind of nature. It's just jumping into some kind of sewage, which is, was a rather strange experience. And I think maybe the most important thing, and I want to stop here with my short introduction to the Emscher, to challenge the perspective on this place. And art has played, I think, a very important role so that people get aware that this is no longer the dirty old river or dirty old water sewage line, but it's really a nice river place where you can do a lot. And changing this perspective on the river, art has helped a lot. I just want to show you three pictures. This one is a enlightened bridge. Another one is getting like an art installation where you can look upon the river like looking upon an attraction, and showing, and I want to stop here, showing that this is a place where you can exhibit new ideas about art and use it as a creative space. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Eckhart. That was fantastic in terms of, showing how the regaining from decline has happened to that landscape. And it took quite a significant amount of time, 30 years, because the task ahead was quite challenging. And it's about cleaning, it's about reinterpreting. And I think that was a fantastic example where one can draw parallels in the subsequent discussion period, where I request once again to the participants to put in their thoughts while every speaker speaks, so that because I was taking notes while Eckhart was talking. So it will be a good idea if you can put your questions right away at the question answer session. Before we go to the other speakers, now I invite our next speaker or speakers. I invite Dr. Brant Ryan, who's the head of the City Design and Development Group, an associate professor of urban design and public policy at MIT. And Dr. Siddhartha Sen, who is a professor and the Associate Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning at Morgan State University. And Neha Doshi, who is a master's student in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. All three of them will be talking about reimagining the future of jute mills, starting from Kolkata upstream along the river Hooghly, and he will draw parallels and examples as to how this reimagining is possible according to them. I request Dr. Brandt and Dr. Siddhartha Sen and Neha to deliver their talk and presentation, please.
Good evening, everybody. And Monish, thank you so much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here, and I also wanted to thank the organizers. So our presentation is divided into four sections, which is we're going to put Kolkata in context, which is going to be very brief because most of you know about it. Then Neha is going to talk about jute mills as a site for urban redevelopment, and then Brent is going to present two case studies which we think can be adapted, or we could learn something from these case studies about the jute mills in Kolkata. Next, Neha. Very briefly speaking, as I said, I mean, most of you do know about which we call Kolkata, but there are certain unique things about Kolkata which we need to keep in mind if we are going to do anything about Kolkata. First of all, it's a mega city. Then it's becoming a global city, and it holds a position of cultural, political, and economic significance within the whole of India. And next thing, it's a post-industrial city. Like, I mean, again, that's why jute mills, like if you look at them, that was a very significant industry back in the colonial times and up to the 70s, but then that's in decline. So we need to keep that in mind in order to do anything. As we know, it was founded. The reason I say this is like everybody knows that Kolkata was founded by the British almost more than 300 years ago. But one of the interesting things Munish mentioned is like other European settlements and the decline. Like Kolkata, what you call, became the center of European colonization, and that's attributable to the rise of the British and the decline of Danish, Dutch, and Portuguese and everybody else. So it was a dual city, and as you can see, these are artist impressions. One is by Thomas Daniels, a famous landscape artist, which is about there was a black, and that's important because there is still a duality. Like this black town and white town doesn't exist, but there was a black town and white town, which gives us a heritage, what you call a continuity in history and things of that sort. But this duality still exists. Next one. then we have like certain many are in architectural heritages. I mean, like, this is the Writers Building. This is one of the first examples of architecture being used as a symbol of power by the British. But some of it, like what is important is like when we come to the jute mills and conservation, some of it is being conserved. If the conservation takes place very what you call selectively, and that's one of the problems that the jute mills are facing because this is not in the priority agenda, and it is to come from the private side. Next one. Okay, and like it's not only the European architecture. We see wonderful what you call native architecture that was done by the colonial elites, which incorporated classical elements. And this is the Multiclala Palace, one of the most iconic ones. But there are many of them in North Calcutta, elsewhere, also in Howrah, which is unknown, which are in ruins and needs conservation. Okay, next one. Okay, like I was talking about duality, this is a picture that I took last time I went to India. This is ironically, this is called the Trump Towers, and that's the what you call Panchanantala Bosti next to the railroad. So we have this duality is there. So we need to take and this sort of prevails even in the jute mill areas because it's surrounded by bostis. Okay, can we go next? But what is like Kolkata was late into globalization because Bombay and Delhi started much earlier. But we see this kind of what you call European style apartments and offices and SECs and things of that sort, especially in Rajarhat, which is the new town. Can we go next? Okay, but one other important thing to remember is like the image of Kolkata has always been in that of a slum for some reason. And this was, which became more prominent with City of Joy. Unfortunately, I don't know why being Indians we call City of Joy when that was all about the city of Howrah. It's not about Kolkata. His novel was based in Pilkhana Bosti, but somehow because of the film and that there we see a white savior saving Calcutta. So that doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how it is. It's still, I mean, and I don't think we still have to, we haven't shaken off the image of a slum, despite all the new things that are taking place for global architecture and so on and so forth. Next one. Okay, these are examples of some of the, like this is South City Mall. This is the type of development that are taking place, but at the same time, nothing is being done about some of the, what you call heritage buildings in Calcutta. Next one. Okay, so this is where Neha takes over.
So our research team became very interested in understanding how these massive post-industrial sites, these jute mills with very large spatial footprints, sound infrastructure, and proximity to the Hooghly could be renewed and revitalized to help usher the city into a new future that's very sensitive to the needs of all of its population. And we were very interested in understanding how key stakeholders, especially jute mill owners and planners, kind of imagined the possible futures for these sites, and also understanding in particular what the barriers from their perspective, what the key barriers were to this sort of redevelopment. And so we conducted this study from 2020 to 2021, interviewing lots of stakeholders and really carrying out a qualitative study to understand what sorts of opportunities may exist for these jute mills. And so we're now going to share precedents from the United States, where we're all located, that can kind of that Kolkata can draw key insights from.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Dr. Sen, for your presentations, and thank you for the invitation to be here this evening. As we were thinking about the Calcutta jute mills and thinking about Calcutta as a city with an incredible industrial built heritage, and thinking about the ways in which that industrial built heritage could be revitalized, returned to the life of the city, and integrated with addressing social and economic needs, we decided to share two examples of industrial redevelopment along waterfronts from the United States. And I'll present these two examples now. The United States is traditionally thought of as the kingdom of the market. And so urban planning and development in the United States is often thought of as a purely market-led activity. But what I'll show is that in these two examples, that the state or the government, both local and state governments, as well as the market, were both critical to having this revitalization of waterfronts occur. In other words, it was a partnership between government actors and private actors, in this case, developers, who enabled this revitalization to occur. So we begin with the inner harbor of Baltimore. Baltimore is a city that's located along what's called the Northeast Corridor of the United States, between New York and Washington, D.C. And Baltimore is a harbor city. It's located along a deep harbor, an arm of the sea, in other words, not dissimilar from Calcutta. And Baltimore is similar to Calcutta in another way, which is that it doesn't have space for large parks along the waterfront. The waterfront is entirely developed as a commercial waterfront and an industrial waterfront. So when it came time, after the decline of industrial development in the 1970s and 1980s, to redevelop the inner harbor of Baltimore, the city was faced with the challenge. How do you provide public access to this very interesting, but quite challenging of access waterfront? The first move was what we see here. It's called the inner harbor. And in the 1970s, the national government provided funding for, in essence, the seizure of land immediately adjoining the CBD, or Central Business District, to redevelop as a tourist center. The key move of this inner harbor in the 1970s was to return Baltimore's inner harbor to public visibility and to make the public aware that the waterfront was in fact interesting, vital, and a place to go for leisure. But it was not a place to see industrial built heritage. That came later. Next slide, please. Two interesting examples are what we'll share with you now. As Baltimore's inner harbor became a popular tourist attraction, the city realized that there were a variety of industrial buildings that also merited preservation that could be revitalized for additional activities beyond tourism, for heritage, cultural heritage preservation, as well for retail. The first of these examples is an example of cultural heritage preservation. An oyster cannery was converted into a museum of industry adjoining the inner harbor of Baltimore. This cannery was converted into the city's Museum of Industry. So this was a partnership between the city, the state of Maryland, and a nonprofit organization. And the purpose of this museum is both to highlight the city's industrial heritage, but also to preserve original aspects of the building. And so by bringing citizens of Baltimore to this building and by bringing tourists to this building, the city is not only advertising its history as an industrial center, it's advertising the potential of the industrial buildings to be reused for cultural uses. Next slide, please. A second example is also located adjacent to the tourist center of the inner harbor. Recall that the inner harbor did not preserve original historic buildings, but adjacent to this was a power plant that went out of operation in the 1970s and stood vacant for about 20 years. Finally, in the 1990s, the market was able to take advantage of this building, which had been preserved through federal and city historic regulations, and to convert it into an entertainment and retail center. So this very large and spectacular building, which directly adjoined a busy tourist waterfront, became a very popular location for retail and entertainment. And you can see international franchises like the Hard Rock Cafe, the ESPN Zone, and the Barnes and Noble booksellers, all there to capture that tremendous tourist traffic along the Baltimore waterfront and using this spectacular historic building. So this building not only extends the Baltimore waterfront's public access, but it offers a historic heritage building as a representation of preservation. Next slide, please. Let's move to New York City, but not to the spectacular island of Manhattan, but to the other side of the Hudson River. This is a very often less seen side of the river, but it's a side of the river that has a lot of analogies to the Howrah side of the Hooghly River in Calcutta. New York, like Calcutta, is on the wrong side of railroad connections to the rest of the United States. So a variety of railroads had railroad termini along the waterfront in New Jersey, together with a variety of mixed-use industrial and residential land. Again, through the decline of industry in the 1970s, these railroad yards and these industrial facilities lay vacant until the 1990s, when the state of New Jersey and the two municipalities of Jersey City and Hoboken began to revitalize these areas. And what we see in this image is a preserved historic railroad station, the Erie-Lackawanna Station. And look beyond it, we see a mixed use sort of second CBD of office towers and residential buildings in former industrial yards. Next slide, please. This preservation happened through a key public intervention as well. In the 1990s, the state of New Jersey and the federal government constructed a light rail line, or a tram, to travel north to south along this waterfront. No one had ever thought of traveling north to south along this waterfront before. Again, kind of like Howrah, you had a lot of east-west rail lines terminating at the waterfront, but traveling north to south was quite difficult. Once this rail line was connected, it enabled both commuters, residents, and tourists to access all of the sites along the waterfront. And all of a sudden, these waterfront sites became highly desirable. So the light rail motivated mixed-use development through public-private partnerships, revitalizing this part of New Jersey. Next slide, please. An interesting aspect of this preservation and revitalization of the New Jersey waterfront was not just the preservation of historic buildings like the railroad station, but the creation of public open spaces and the addition of cultural facilities and cultural landmarks like artworks. So here we see in construction with developers, two amenities constructed. First, the Newport Green Park. This is built on a former dock land and provides public access and leisure along the waterfront. And Jaume Plensa's Water Soul sculpture, a kind of sculpture for the Instagram era that's built along a dock that faces Manhattan, but is attracting tourists to the New Jersey side. Next slide, please. In conclusion, a few insights to move forward as we continue our Calcutta research, and we look forward to collaborating with all of the other speakers in this panel tonight as we move forward. Calcutta faces, and Howrah, face many challenges to the redevelopment of their jute mills. First of all, the mills are experiencing economic difficulties, but they're still privately owned, and mill owners are faced with several challenges. The land use puzzle. Regulations are currently precluding the conversion of industrial land. The formal processes for that conversion don't yet exist. And as yet, there's still not full communication among the different government actors and between the public and private sectors. So we offer these insights from Baltimore and New Jersey. First of all, think about a strategic master plan that could offer a vision to excite both the public and private stakeholders, as well as public citizens, public-spirited citizens, about the changes needed to achieve this vision. Second of all, think about public-private partnerships led with public money, but following with private investment to offer opportunities for the key development that needs to happen. And lastly, think about a combination of programming. Use that industrial heritage, but also think about opportunities for open space, transit improvements, as well as cultural facilities like artworks. Thank you very much.
That was very, very informative. Thank you, Dr. Sen, Brandt, and Doshi, for giving such a wonderful presentation in terms of Baltimore and the other side of Hudson River. And I see a common thread already developing of using the spaces by the side of the river for public engagement and public art, which is I think remained a very common thread. And I really liked when it was mentioned that the kingdom of the market a market-led activity, which is so true. But yet, we find in this presentation that how the government actually mooted the idea and intent to kickstart the project. And there has been a lot of intent also shown, but a comprehensive thing, which was highlighted at the end about a strategic master plan is something that is very much in our minds. And we will discuss these matters of public-private strategic master plan and opening up for public spaces, tourism and leisure, housing, etc., which came up very distinctly in both these presentations, which could also hold a lot of lessons, a lot of for the context of Hooghly heritage landscape. I now invite I now invite one sec. Yes. Our Dr. Soumen Bandyopadhyay, who is from a stretch of the Hooghly river landscape, but he's a professor and chair of the architecture department of the University of Liverpool, and he has been engaged in public consultation and documentation with local NGOs and partners, various partners, including the government, about the Hooghly heritage landscape and kind of initiating a kind of a management plan or working towards the management plan, which I'm sure will have strategic understanding and strategic methods and will involve all that has been mentioned about public-private and combination of programs, etc. I now invite Dr. Soumen Bandyopadhyay to deliver his talk and presentation. Over to
Thank you, Manish.
Soumen.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you very much. And if I can share my screen just now. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to do a presentation here. And I think much has been already said, and I think some of those cues will actually continue to probably be relevant for the work and the talk that I'm going to deliver. It is, as Manish said, that we've been involved as a team, and I'll talk about that in a moment, looking at the Hooghly heritage landscape and how we can better support and manage the heritage within this stretch of land. And some of the kind of key themes that are coming out of it is, and I'm going to touch upon, are to do with empowering the owners, rethinking cooperatives, and probably emphasizing the importance of creative reuse within this context. So as we were engaged with the Hooghly River of Cultures project, which, as has been indicated, was the location for a number of European settlements to take shape in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so we looked at that, but also we looked into it in the context of both the indigenous culture that used to exist and the kind of syncretism that took place, but also at the same time trying to understand what futures it holds and for this particular part of the river. And there were various partners, but it's mainly a kind of UK AHRC, the UK Funding Council funded project where we looked into a range of issues, but some of the outcomes are to do with the Heritage Management Plan, which is an evolving document. Then a Hooghly Heritage Audit, formation of the Intact Hooghly, which was something that we were involved with, 2 exhibitions, a symposium, then we made also a docudrama, Samayata, and also various Hooghly Heritage Days. So we worked with Ian Magadera, who is from Liverpool University, as the lead, and I was very closely involved in a number of others. Just a kind of outline of this heritage management strategy. Obviously, I can't go through everything, but it included historical understandings, it included analysis, but also included case studies of evolving scenarios and to assessment of those in terms of how successful they are from different perspectives. But also, as I was saying before, to establish certain key directions in heritage policies, also initiate an audit, a proper audit, integrating the river as a kind of integrated heritage corridor, and also establishing the key principles for managing that heritage. What I will talk about today is 3 or 4 different things very quickly. One is to do with the emphasis that we put on domestic cultural landscape, which is under threat, to emphasize that, and the importance of empowering owner custodians. Then the need for innovative cooperatives, especially for in complex ownership situations. And I'll draw on some of the other experiences that we've had from Middle East in Oman, where we have implemented a number of projects, and finally to draw on a couple of student work as well to show what can be done creatively. We work as a group called RKM, and it has been active in different parts of the world. As you can see here in India, we have been, aside from working on the Hooghly River cultures, we also work in Srangapatnam and Bijapur. We have a team, a core team based in Liverpool, but we also draw on other expertise as and when necessary. This is a Hooghly River cultures team. As you can see, that aside from Liverpool University team, there are a number of people from other academic institutions across Europe and UK, but also a large number of actual local participants and volunteers who have actually made a very important contribution to the entire project. Just to look into this first issue of the domestic heritage, because that's something that we were very keen on and interested in developing. And this domestic does not mean the house, the domestic, the dwelling, but actually the domestic in the Indian cultural context is quite an extended landscape where it starts from the house. Maybe one makes a visit via the pathway to a temple or and eventually coming to the to take a bath in the river. The river edge actually creates a range of activities around bathing. That includes also worshipping in many of the shrines and prayer spaces and temples, and then also going back and probably sitting down, as you can see in the on the right hand side slide, sitting down on what is called the rock or a rewalk, where you might actually be catching up on gossip within the neighborhood and so on. But many of these things are actually under threat, as you can see from the river, from these the ghats, that many of these ghats are in a really bad state of preservation. We have temples and shrines which are actually also suffering from lack of maintenance and care. We obviously have huge disruptions to the domestic situation because of the socioeconomic pressures that we are under. But also all of this has actually been integrated within a larger cultural landscape, which included a number of water bodies and associated green landscape and so on and so forth, which created an integrated whole, which is being disrupted and is under threat because of the many development pressures we are under. So it is quite important that we safeguard this and we understand and find out measures by which we can address some of those problems. So in approaching the strategy that we followed very closely the historic urban landscape agenda, the whole agenda, and we undertook, as I was mentioning, the Hooghly Heritage Audit, which is a huge undertaking because we should not forget that there are also both European cultural monuments and buildings and structures, as well as a huge number of pre-colonial as well as indigenous, other indigenous structures and monuments and so on, which has not been properly understood. I think the issue of participatory planning is something that I think the government needs to build towards, which we did not work so much. But what we did do is to understand the vulnerability of the urban heritage And we undertook the domestic heritage assessment and the threats on the domestic heritage. We also looked into the integrating the urban heritage values and their vulnerability status into a wider framework of city development. Especially we worked on the empowering of owner custodians, and that meant that we were trying to build up a body of knowledge which we can actually hand over to the owner custodians who could actually use that to their benefit. And also in that process, forming cooperatives. One of the things that we realized in the case of situations like complex ownerships, that it is important that cooperatives could actually, because where ownership is perhaps a bit difficult to pin down, it is important that cooperatives could be formed so that the benefits could be shared across a number of potential owners and occupiers. And that is one of the ways in which we think it can go forward. So that's something that, again, and we think that that is very important, that we have this the intangible cultural aspects as well at the same time projected. And one of the things that we did was to do with this drama on the Jagadhatra Puja in Chandanagar, which is a well-known event that takes place around sort of October, November time, slightly after the Durga Puja festival, and it's quite an important aspect of that part of the world. But also the issues of how we can actually help and support local cultural initiatives. For example, this virtual heritage experience, which we're hoping to build on a kind of cheap and a way so that we can actually roll it out over a large number of museums and experiences. That's something that we're looking into very while we do this work. Now, I was going to draw on a couple of things from Oman, where we had worked on this Al-Hamra, the Misfat al-Abdiin World Heritage site, which has won the United Nations World Tourism Organization Best Tourism Award, Village Award in 2021. This is where we learned the lessons of the issue of the cooperative and the community participation, but the issue of complex participation processes. Not only that it is about the way that we engage with the dominant stakeholders, but also the multiplicity of smaller stakeholders, the owners, and how we engage them in the process is quite crucial. That's something that we had learned from, where we also helped in developing a cooperative, which has now taken over the control of the village and is becoming very successful with franchising out of a number of facilities that we have developed. We also engaged with the local children and the younger groups within the community, and that's where the participation rather than the kind of consultation took place. This transformation from consultation to participation was an important part of our lessons, and many of these issues that we learned from them were actually implemented into the strategy, which integrated a range of traffic strategies to a networked approach to understanding of places, and that includes sustainability of sources. And so the project that came up, they combined a whole range of actual conservation measures, but also adaptive reuse approaches, which brought in modern material and modern construction systems and use patterns so that we could begin to bring together a kind of a more aspirational approach to heritage and modernity. And that adaptive reuse using contemporary materials and so on is quite crucial. But what I wanted to just highlight before I end is that it's quite important to think creatively about the use pattern. So, for example, biointelligent inhabitation and sustainable retrofitting of our cities is crucial. And this shows an example of industrial settings, densification of sites, and approaching the right kind of optimal density is quite crucial too. And finally, also the cross-programming within very defined heritage sites is quite crucial too. So these are the kind of lessons that I wanted to bring to the table for discussion. And thank you for having me, and I look forward to further comments. Bye.
Monish, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Shominda, Shomin Bandyopadhyay. That was quite a comprehensive presentation. I must mention here that there has been a lot of effort over over the last decade. I must say that there has been efforts, though on a smaller area, not the entire stretch, um, in different parts of this 20-kilometer stretch of the river. And the jute mill that has been shown earlier, it's been a case of really a lockdown situation. I mean, or pent up and trapped with a lot of difficulties in ownership and unfolding them and lending them towards development. There are a lot of bottlenecks there, which did not over the last decade or so. But there are efforts to unlock them in a piecemeal way. There are efforts that have gone in towards studying various areas. But this study of Dr. Shomin Bandyopadhyay looked much more into various aspects. I was taking some notes about empowerment model, which was highlighted in his presentation, and the domestic heritage assessment, which is very true. Each of these are traditional neighborhoods abutting the river, which is also a very, very important aspect to the whole cultural landscape of this area. So it's not only industrial, it's cultural, it's domestic, it's traditional, and not to mention about the intangible aspect that goes into the making. But I was very curious, which I will hold it for later, the difference between the public and the government. I mean, is it the public is not the government, or government is not the public? I think that is something which I would like to know more about later in our discussion, maybe. Now, I invite Dr. Shikha Jain. Dr. Shikha Jain is a friend of mine. It's from Delhi. She's from Delhi, and she has been instrumental in nominating and working on various landscapes, historic landscapes in Calcutta, in northern part of India, particularly in Udaipur and Ajmer and Jaipur, and learning from the Indian cities of how to make things happen. How to unlock maybe, and how to yet and bring about or redeeming from a declining situation. I really look forward to Shikha's presentation on the Indian cities, experiences from the Indian cities, Udaipur, Ajmer, and Jaipur. I request Dr. Shikha Jain to deliver her presentation. Over to Shikha.
I'm trying to show, some of the examples that I've worked on in Udaipur, Ajmer, and Jaipur today. Of course, these days I'm also working in Kolkata, and on specifically on the museums in Belvedere Estate. And I mean, I realize the significance of Hooghly riverfront so much. So I'm really happy to be part of this webinar today to, feed into what you're planning for the Hooghly landscape. So I have examples from 3 different cities where we were involved. 2 of them involved waterfront development. And it's just to show you how smaller cities or mid-scale cities are taking up such development projects in a small manner. So I'll start with the city of Udaipur. It is a lake city, has a network of 7 lakes, and it was founded in 16th century. has about a small population of about 600,000, and it largely depends on tourism and minerals for its income. So heritage tourism and the lake tourism are definitely very important factors in its sustenance. This is a historic image showing how it was initially. You can appreciate the cultural landscape. Most of it is still intact today because of the lake and the heritage tourism development, and it's a very important international tourist destination till date. So it's basically, it has seen its pitfalls. There have been floods, droughts, famines, and earthquakes. But yet it has sustained with its water bodies. And of course, it is very much dependent on these water bodies. If you see on the left, it's basically a network of 7 lakes that was planned by the various rulers at different periods from the 16th to the early 20th century. So the earliest lake, Pichola, or below that you see, and the top one, Fateh Sagar Lake, is the last one from early 20th century. And this Pichola is fed, you can see it's in a set in a valley. So they are basically fed by the tributaries of the river. And this particular lake is historic. It's a 13th century lake, which was expanded in the 16th century to create this city. Has great significance because it is also used for festivals by the locals, besides being a great, tourist destination with hotels like Lake Palace in between. This is the Gangor festival, which is being celebrated at the Gangor Ghat. And you can see the paradox, when the lake dries up. This is an image from 2006. So even, the Lake Palace Hotel, which is so famous for Udaipur, it depends on camel rides for sustaining, and the city really suffers. And yet, even in the dried bed of lake, the community is so associated with the local location, of the rituals, that they still carry on rituals. They order water tanks, and they carry on these rituals followed during the death in a family or other such, even on the dried lake bed. So it just makes us realize how significant these lakes are, not only in terms of aesthetics, but also for the community. So this was a development project where, several aspects of this lake and the ghat were taken up for development. And this is the Gangor Ghat, or the historic ghat, and its various stretches. And it had various typologies, including the temples, Haveli, and some new historic heritage hotels that were coming up around the area. This is the proposed elevation, and the work was carried out even now to till last year, 2021. And this is the condition of the Gangor Ghat today. It's almost finished, and it's back to its original position, being used for festivals and all. And the other lake, which is the early 20th century lake, was an artificial lake, Fateh Sagar. Again, very significant. It was refurbished in the late 19th century by Maharana Fateh Singh. You can see the historic pictures. And this is something that is more in the newer area of the town, and is currently used by tourists as well as by local citizens, just for recreational purpose. And this was, again, there were several aspects identified along the lakeside to develop the promenade, the jetties, and the pal area, which is used for morning walks by the residents. And this is, it was finished about 2 years back. And so you have, the complete promenade here, which was developed. And this particular road becomes completely pedestrianized in the mornings and evenings, though it carries traffic through the middle of the day. And on the other side, you have a park that complements this whole cultural landscape component. I will move on to Ajmer, where we see that, the lakefront project was actually embedded in a larger management plan for the city. It was the City Hirday Plan, a central government scheme on heritage cities. And it was for Ajmer and Pushkar together. That this is also a very historic city. You can see how Anasagar, the lake, was, the one sustaining the historic city. This is an image from 1863. And what you see today, how the city has expanded around this lake. This is, just giving a quick overview of how the city developed, from the Mughal period to later colonial periods. And as part of the Hriday plan, we did a mapping of the heritage assets, including the natural, the intangible, and the cultural heritage assets, and then identified 5 major projects across the city in which the Anasagar lakefront was one of the projects besides Heritage Walk and others. These were supposed to be the main heritage assets to be developed, and this was finished in 2018. It started in 2015. This is one of the heritage walks that was developed. There were conservation and reuse projects, that came up as part of this. And of course, the Anasagar lakefront, you can see what was the before situation. It was not even available to the local citizens, and this is the way you can see it was barred and misused. And you can see how the development works were carried out along the lakefront. And this is the situation today. Besides this lakefront, which ends into a baradari, a Mughal period baradari, which is under Archaeological Survey of India. It also extends into this public garden of Subhash Udyan, which was taken up as part of this project. So it's a complete, continued site now with the garden. And these have become like the 2 largest urban public spaces which were developed under Hriday, which are currently being used by the local citizens as well as the tourists in the area. This is the view of the garden, and you can see at the end, the Baradari that is under ASI. It was constructed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan in 2 phases. So this is, and lastly, the third project, which I bring from Jaipur, which is a World Heritage City as well as a UNESCO Creative City of Crafts and Folk Arts, an 18th century city which is still surviving. And here we can see some aspects, of what similar to Kolkata in terms of traffic and pressure and the issues, urban issues that the cities are facing today. So I bring a small example of Ghat Ki Guni. This is a valley stretch just on the outskirts where there were 52 properties, historic gardens, temples, and palace spaces which were lying unused. It was part of, these were unprotected structures. They had mixed ownership, public, private, and it was part of the national highway, Delhi-Agra. So there were a lot of trucks with suits, being deposited on the sides of these heritage structures and a lot of damage being caused. So this was taken up as a major project. This is a stretch of 2.5 kilometers. And there was a vision developed where one looked at, having adventure trails up in the hill area, the royal gardens to be developed for recreational purpose, and a street hut, whereas it was proposed to move the highway through a tunnel and divert it completely. So these 252 historic structures were declared protected. Historic gardens were restored, involving traditional masons, lime workers, and stone workers who are very, very abundant in Rajasthan. And these kind of projects have given them an opportunity for further training. And this is the diversion. So you can see this entire valley stretch of 2.5 kilometers, which is now completely, the highway is diverted. So you have a 50-meter tunnel here in the hill. It took about 10 years to actually get the permission process because this was under the forest, the hills. So to get this permission and to get the tunnel for 50 meters, and the rest of the stretches on the surface. But now these are totally free of the traffic. This was the situation before conservation, and finally with involvement of the local people and the private owners of the property who also cooperated. This was completely conserved. These are the restored gardens, which are currently functional during the daytime. They have a lot of visitors who come here. There are certain cafes in the restaurant which cater to that, and museums are also being proposed. And there was a heritage walk that was started since 2014, which still continues till date. And lastly, this is my last slide, just showing that similar adaptive reuse examples are inside the walled city of Jaipur. This is the Rajasthan School of Arts that's been recently converted into a museum for the craftspeople to showcase their crafts. Thank you.
Thank you, Shikha. That was fantastic from 3 different contexts. I think what was more close to was that stretch of which I can draw parallels to Hooghly, perhaps, if you're Ghat Ki Koni and the other Ajmer, of course, which is of a huge population, and there are a lot of other planning issues that goes into. But what is interesting, which I felt, was that the central government scheme, you kind of embedded the plans into an existing government scheme, yeah, and that perhaps had a greater impact and way forward that perhaps it shows visibly. There has been efforts, I must say, after looking at your adaptive reuse, some of your adaptive reuse projects. As I said before, there has been efforts at different towns along the stretch of Hooghly, like the Danish developed their erstwhile town called Serampore, which forms very much a part of that, and they managed to restore and reuse a couple of these buildings. And that attracted the government to come forward to clean up or to do work between these buildings, right? And I think that was a lesson that perhaps we kind of learned, and we tried to work out in other towns along the Hooghly, like the Chandernagore, which is the French, and the Dutch, the Chinsura, and there have been efforts, though at a very small scale, and but the scaling up was first perhaps shown at Serampore. It needs more scaling up, but I think otherwise it doesn't remain visible, and it doesn't attract the attention of many. So I think that these experiments and these works are slowly happening even in the stretch, and it's very interesting to learn how public parks, how Creative City for Crafts and Folk Arts were part and parcel of this strategy of moving things forward in your cases. I now come to our last speaker. Thank you very much, Shikha. I now come to Paul Moyes, who practices from his office in Rotterdam and teaches at Delft University. He also remained my teacher, and we had the opportunity of traveling on a boat up and down the river Hooghly, and so he's quite aware of the landscape, Paul. And Paul is going to talk about projects and processes, and I hope that he will try and link it up of his understanding while working on the projects in his own country, in Netherlands, which are the processes that has a potential of working in a context like Hooghly Heritage Landscape. Over to Paul.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's really my pleasure to be present at this webinar. It's a long time since I last was in Kolkata, and I have very good memories of that. Today, I want to share some of the experience we have in the Netherlands, thinking a little bit on the cultural landscape of India, of Kolkata. Here you see some images of the Netherlands, of my country in Europe. And it's a very small, tiny country, but you can also see it as a very big cultural landscape. Over decades and centuries, the Dutch have created and rebuilt or constructed a country in a constant fight with the elements, with the water in the delta of many rivers. Little by little, from the sea, the country took shape. Anyway, you can say that today we live fighting the water, we live with the water, and we live even upon the water. Water is really the very DNA in our landscape. And from this notion of our cultural landscape, I think also stems our attitudes toward heritage. We all the time have to reinvent and redesign and rebuild our country in line with this constant battle with the water and against the water. Next, please. So in our heritage, it's not so much the effort to make museums in a modern country. It is about reinventing our cultural landscape over and over again. So what we always try to do is to incorporate cultural value as one of the ingredients of the landscape of the future. And over the years, we, I think, have managed to develop tools, which I will show some today, how to balance the need for change with the desire to preserve and to keep the identity and keep the country recognizable and to create a spatial quality in which both the old and the new find their place. Crucial for that is to understand and define precisely what are the values of heritage, what makes something special. If you can translate that into guidelines or inspiration, it can be one of the ingredients for transformation. So a big part of my work as a consultant and a researcher and a supervisor is to seduce and inspire owners and developers to put a little bit more effort and a little bit more love in their projects, in which they can, I think, have a lot of quick wins and improve the quality of their projects. Next, please. In this presentation, I want to address 3 points of our practice in the Netherlands. It's about the toolbox we use, rather than showing a lot of different cases. And I think there will be parallels with many of the beautiful projects we saw in the previous presentations. The first thing I want to share with you is the way we look at our landscape and the technique we use to be precise in acting within this dynamic cultural landscape we have. And that's the layer technique. By making different layers, by reading our landscape in all the different layers that have built it up, we can distinguish between the dynamic and the more static parts of the landscape. So on the left, you can see the occupation and programming is something which changes every few years, whereas the water structure and the landscape itself, the soil, remain the same. In between, you have the networks of infrastructure, you have layers of heritage, you have layers of all different things. And if you put everything on the right level, you can intervene in the landscape, but at the same time, keep all the layers intact. This technique of layering landscapes can also be used to make a reading of the historic development of a landscape. It's one landscape on top of the others. What I think was really nice to hear in the previous presentations about the Hooghly area, it's not just a European history. It's only that was passing by. There are many different layers of things that became that were there before and came afterwards, and all these things can be also layered in such a model in which you can understand how an area slowly develops. And in today's landscape, we are able to read and recognize all the layers of the past. On the right, you see one of the layers of the conurbation of the Netherlands in between Amsterdam and Rotterdam. The medieval system of improvements in the water system. It still can be recognized in the landscape. But you really need to sort it out to know this is part of that layer, and all the different landscapes that came after it are on top of that. So if you look through the layers, I think you can also play with it. You can preserve parts of those landscapes, but at the same time also introduce new things and new developments and new infrastructures. Yes? That layered landscape sometimes is visible almost literally in the landscape. Can you show the aerial picture, please? Yes, this one. So here you see the layer of the historic landscape along the river, combined with the layer of the modern infrastructure of the train system in an aqueduct where both the landscapes meet, and each has its own logic, its own speed and its own dynamic, but they can live side by side in the landscape. It's almost a superposition of one landscape over the other. Yes, next. but it can also be a juxtaposition of one landscape next to the other landscape. On the top, you see the green heart metropolis, built up of all our big cities, the big cities in Holland, like Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, Utrecht. There's a huge space which we call the Green Heart, which is a medieval landscape, which you can see on the other pictures, which in its character still has very much the appearance of the past, but in the way it's being used, it's part of this modern city. It's the way where we have our leisure, where we have recreation, where we have the suburban areas. And in the strategies to develop these areas, we try to have these clear things next to each other, the interrelation of the metropolitan ring around this green heart and the spatial and landscape qualities inside. And at the same time, both inside and outside, the dynamic is very big in the programming, in the use, in the way it's organized. So it's a very dynamic part of the city, but it still has the appearance of a medieval city. So it's all based from this concept of layering landscapes and bringing landscapes in connection with each other or putting them on top of each other. The second thing, on the next slide, please, is a strategy for regional heritage development. The big danger, if you look at such a big area as the Hooghly River area, is that at every place you're doing something in itself, and it's very difficult to make interrelations between the different destinations. In the Netherlands, we noticed that all the tourists that come here prefer to go to Amsterdam, and it's extremely difficult to get them out of the city. So the effect is that Amsterdam, in the pre-COVID times, was completely congested with tourists, whereas other parts of the country, which are desperate waiting for tourists, hardly have anybody coming because it is unknown and there's no reason to go to all the different places. And the strategy of our National Tourism Board to do something about that is in the story tree, with the narrative, different narratives of what you can find in the country. You can spread tourists as if it was on a metro system. And each of these destinations you can see on the map is part of a heritage strategy in order to tell stories, bring people along and get them on one place, from one place to the other. And the very important thing for each of these heritage lines is that they have a very clear theme, that they are very attractive, but also that if you go to one of these places, you will get curious to find something new on the next place, and that it will not be a repetition. So instead of having competing destinations, you try to get as much synergy as possible using the narrative to direct people from one place to the other. It means that in the concept of such a heritage hub or a heritage line, it's not about what you want to offer, but you go and see what is the demand. You try to picture what are the visitors, what are the users, and that can also be residents, not only tourists, and how can we from their mind get them on their way to discover such a thing, and what is the story you want to tell. So Chinsura, all these places, they are not a book in itself, they are a chapter in a bigger book, and there are different lines and different stories next to it. So that can become a very rich panorama in which heritage really gets the scale of a regional approach. Yes, another example of the lines on the next slide. This is the northeast of the country. It's a very remote area in the Dutch conditions. And it's the area, the province, which is almost in the prehistoric times. It's where you really feel the depth. It's far away from the dynamics of Amsterdam and Rotterdam. For this province, we developed heritage lines, trying to identify the different stories. For the Hooghly area, you can imagine that the European settlements is one of these lines, but also the textile industry could be one. The worshipping, many different parts of history. They all will make them as a product together much stronger. So rather than focusing only on the European aspect, I think the interesting thing is put all the different stories together, because that will make a rich panorama and almost a rich fruit salad for a regional strategy. So these 6 lines in the province of Drenthe all have their own logotype. They have clear images. They go from the prehistoric settlements and the archaeological findings to the post-modern landscape. Each is a very interesting story in itself, but altogether they show the richness and the access you have to the entire region. Yes, please. And then we get to the third and last of the things I wanted to show. And these are some examples of creative reuse. And that is where the design comes in, but also very much the public interest and the public programming. I have three examples of refurbishment in the Netherlands. The first is a factory, big empty space. Yes, next please. Which was transformed into a public space with libraries and all kinds of meeting facilities and communal services, without making a new design, but just making a smooth programming and a fitting into this context. And these create really the new squares and public spaces and meeting spaces within the cities. Next, please. Another example is this convent with a church in the south of the Netherlands, where it's about bringing programs together. Many of the heritage sites are very big, but if you make different programs, you make new connections, you make nodes in cities where different users will meet each other. But this is a place which got a new backbone, which is the white thing you see in the middle. Next, please. Next slide, please. Which is programmed as a hotel, as a congress facility, as a meeting place, and as a concert hall, all in one complex. And the backbone, will bring all these users and things together and reorganizes the way a monastery can function as a modern community center. And my last example on the next slide is that if the new world is approaching, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to demolish everything which there is. This is unlisted heritage, old factory buildings in the city of Eindhoven, where Philips is based in the Netherlands, where new high-rise residential buildings are being developed. Next, please. And instead of making the site completely empty, the project was designed in such a way that 5 skyscrapers will be constructed over these historic buildings. And what you can see in the picture on the right below is that a residential building from the 50s, 2 factories from the late 19th century, and some pieces of architecture of the 1920s are all preserved within the project. And that means that these modern residential towers will get a plinth of 3 or 4 stories high with a public programming. There's also a lot of stories embedded of the history of this place. So that really one layer over the other, the city grows, becomes modern, but keeps its stories, keeps its qualities, and gives new ways to use this heritage. I will keep it here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a gamut of things that was shown, and I'm sure, and I was also looking at the question and answer box, which is also quite a large number of questions emanating from all the lectures. I request, before I say a few more words about Paul, I think what struck me was the idea of Paul of strategy for regional development and interrelationship between various works that goes in, and of course there are a lot of commonalities of reusing and initiating change, etc., which are also very important, and bringing about that strategy of continuously trying to work out reinterpreting the heritage and make it as inclusive as possible. I think that was quite a number of things that came out. But I now request all the panelists to put their video on, and we get into, as I said, I was going through the question and answers. We will delve a few things, which I will kickstart with very short, brief questions, which emanates in my mind as a whole, in the whole thing, I see a lot of commonality. And I see of the approaches being from Germany to all the presentations. The commonality which I just quickly highlight is would rather fall in there is a need for working together, but it has to kind of identify the objective is to redeem the decline of an area which has reminiscence and landscape, which has got tangible and intangible association to the city and the mind space of the city. I think that is very important. Otherwise, these projects perhaps would not have been initiated already. That is number one. And secondly, I think there has been another very common thread which I gather is that it doesn't happen all of a sudden. I mean, it requires its own time and strategizing at a larger level, at various levels, at the local level, at the policy level, at the design level, at the creative conceptualization level. And I think these levels are the indices for successes. And third thing, which I gather is that how to unlock, what are the enticements that you need to perhaps propose or do in the public domain that entices or snowballs or creates opportunities for a program to roll on. And what should I say? I mean, take it up like a spin-off from one to the other. I think that is another area. But what we perhaps didn't see, how the local existing living heritage in any of these cases. I mean, where any of these cases lacked perhaps the living heritage aspect, where Shominda mentioned about the domestic heritage, which is actually still lived in, and so one is redundant spaces like what we have in Hooghly after the partition. We lost the major trade to Bangladesh after partition. And most of these industries became sick, and they got into sick, and they got speculated upon, and people have changed hands. They were declared safe. There were retrenchment of the workers, and so on and so forth. So a large part of the landscape occupies the mills, which of course there are a lot of examples that we saw in our examples of how those things were moved forward and what were the bottlenecks, if that comes out in our discussion for a very brief period. And finally, I would like to say public-private partnership seems to be the buzzword for moving things forward, and that brings in the earlier question, that is public not the government, or is government is a separate entity, public is another entity, and private is also public, right? People. So I think that is something which also crops up, which I don't see in the strategy for planning for Hooghly, an initial towards a management plan, the role of the government. There are role of co-ops and thinking about co-ops and other. So that's another challenge that perhaps the models has to get embedded, as Shikha mentioned, to embed in the existing schemes of the government, and how to do that. There has been efforts by the government of cleaning the Ganga River, of which Hooghly is a part, and that reminded me when I was going through, I was seeing the presentation from Dr. Eckhart, and he said 30 years of naturalization, where I think we also spent about 20-25 years, but the effluents were quite huge. And we can we managed to clean up the quality of the water to a great extent. But I think there was lack of integration. It was at a later point of that scheme when they really never thought of integrating the river, which is, and the adjacent spaces and buildings and public areas. And I think that was missing in that Ganga Heritage Action Plan, which was enrolled across India at a really whooping cost and funded by World Bank and others at one point of time, which I don't hear anymore. So it has ebbed and died its natural death, that scheme. Now we have got different schemes in India, particularly schemes that relate to heritage tag. They call it Hriday and other aspects. Ajmer, I think, is an example of Hriday under Smart City program. And those schemes, I think we need to kind of tweak for respective context, which can and show to the government mechanisms. But I think primarily there has been efforts, as I said earlier, by various groups, and there is a need, as Paul said, of regional interrelations and working out regional framework. Well, so with these few things, I would like to open up a few questions. But before we do that, if we have any response from these observations, and we can discuss those between ourselves for 5-7 minutes, 10 minutes. I mean, amongst us, before we open it up, maybe that will answer a few of the questions that they may have. One of the things that is about how we take on board the living heritage, the domestic heritage, and not drive large-scale projects like in some examples, which can actually take out a lot of people and their rights to use the public spaces. Any issues that cropped up while working on your examples that you managed to drive out a lot of people who used to enjoy that area pre-development?
I'll speak briefly if I may. Am I audible?
Sure.
Thank you. The examples that I showed are in quite central areas. And so in these cases, there wasn't necessarily a large community directly adjacent to the sites. So there wasn't necessarily a kind of a displacement or ignoring necessarily of residential areas. However, there are a variety of additional examples of industrial revitalization or adaptive reuse projects in the United States where adjoining communities have much more of a role and a place in the redevelopment. For example, in many of the mill cities of Massachusetts. And in those cases, the mills are quite often, they're not turned over to be spectacular tourist attractions or cultural facilities. They're turned over to be much more prosaic uses, shops, housing, sometimes housing for moderate income, sometimes housing for market rate. And very often you find local community organizations that are based in the neighborhood participating in redeveloping these mills. So I think what we need to understand when we look at the jute mill situation in the Calcutta metropolitan area, and by that I include Howrah, is that they're very geographically diverse. Some of them are in direct center city locations. There's no doubt that a kind of spectacular rehabilitation that could be led by the market would be appropriate. Others that are in much more remote locations, difficult of access, but similarly that are adjacent to dense communities, it's much more appropriate to think of a community-led, maybe in partnership with a small market actor. So I think that the jute mills need to be understood in their local detail. They're not a one-size-fits-all solution. And in that sense, I apologize for the examples I provided, but I didn't have space to provide a larger diversity of examples. Thank you.
Paul, would you like to kind of take this discussion of large-scale projects for small community-led development, large-scale development, the relevance of doing all these parallelly?
Manish, Dr. Eckhart has his hand raised.
Right. Dr.
Yes, thank you
Eckhart,
very much.
if you may.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. As I was listening to the presentations, especially from the Hooghly project, I think trying to compare what I explained about the Hampshire River is that there are two different ways of heritage. There's one way that is the heritage that is very strongly already on your agenda with the renovation of the old buildings and the places that you so nicely shown to us. But there is this other heritage, which probably I was more addressing, the heritage that comes from industry, from everyday life. And here people are often not very well aware that this is a kind of heritage and that it is worth to be protected. But I think when you start this process of revitalizing the river and renaturalizing the river maybe, then you're starting a long learning process. As I was telling, we had a process about 40 years. And in this 40 years, the perception changed totally and turned around very, very dramatically, actually. So from seeing this old mills as something abundant and redundant to revalorize them as something that is worth to be protected, that it is a long way. And I think you need to have a plan to take the people all the way with you on this learning process. So that's why I think you should have this as an aim to get daily practices and daily uses into your heritage program. And that means, from my point of view, you have to have this big projects, the flagship project, yes, but you have to have a lot of small projects and which are basically not commercial. They are educative, they are leisure oriented, but they are not for getting to making money. Otherwise, a lot of people will not be able to join it. So that came up when I was listening to you, and as I'm not I've never been to this area, and this is my first encounter, so to say, with your project. That was something that came up into my mind, and maybe this is helpful for your further discussion. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Paul.
Dr. Manish, there is a hand up by Dr. Bandopadhyay also, so maybe you ask
Right.
Paul
After Bandopadhyay, yes. Maybe because Dr. Eckhart.
No, it's fine if Paul wants to say something, and then I'll come back.
Please,
not a problem.
Please, I request you. Then Paul will also make it after you.
Yeah, I think I just simply wanted to make the point. I think Dr. Eckhart's sort of emphasis on the industrial heritage, and I think that's quite relevant thinking about, because I made the case for domestic heritage simply because that that kind of constitutes, or that makes up the kind of large swathe of the riverine landscape that we have around the Hooghly River and in the Hooghly River region. And I think the developmental pressures are such that today, if we cannot safeguard those, then very soon, and it happens, probably, it is happening at an alarming rate at this point, where these are being converted into, they're being pulled down, converted into high-rise or medium-rise flats, residential apartments. And that is the way that things are happening. And so unless this is commercially beneficial, that historic or historic buildings or their homes, which are large and possibly difficult to maintain, if they're not economically viable, then they will go. So I think that's one of the kind of things that we have to keep in mind. But on the other hand, I think what is really coming across kind of quite interestingly is that many of these industrial sites are actually very interestingly connected to, if you think about Chandanagar, Chinsura, and so on, especially Chandanagar, but also Bodhibati and areas like that, where they coexist with residential developments. So because the morphology has been such that some of the riverine landscape has been transformed into jute mills and so on. So the opportunity for leisure, as incorporated with the domestic landscape, as a kind of as a civic space. In those civic space, it rains a hell of a lot in our part of the world. So I think as a civic space, it could be developed quite effectively. And I think, therefore, the case can be made certainly for an integrated development, but looking at where we are going, because at the end of the day, the economic, social, and political decision-making will be critical to the survival or not of these places. So I think that's what I would like to highlight.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something. I mean, this is the piggybacking on Shomen's, which you call point. I mean, it's not only the indigenous landscapes. If you look at the development that is taking place for these jute mills, it's like really, really bad real estate. And it's like bad multi-story housing done by the local developers, completely underhand and things of that sort. And that sort of needs to change. And in our project, we haven't made the recommendations, so I didn't have the time. I mean, those are the kind of things that we have been thinking of. I mean, using what you call tourism and things of that sort to rejuvenate these mills and make them an attraction. And so one of the things that could perhaps be done is we make some compromises. Some of it is what you call high-rise buildings, but the rest of the land they dedicate to what you call public amenities. That sort of a thing could be done. But all of this, as you know, those of you who live in Kolkata, requires a political will, and I don't see that political will, what you call, existing in Calcutta. So those are the biggest, what you call, impediments to doing something like this.
Do I get it right? Are you saying that this new development needs to be guided, and Shominda, that maybe some design guidelines or design framework for new development and other policies that can actually protect all these domestic heritage, domestic neighborhoods, living neighborhoods, which has got the quality of a townscape, which is very integral to the character of these towns. Side by side, a very colonial character. Like when you arrive at Chandanagar, it's very the strand of Chandanagar is very salubrious strand by the river. So protecting that as well as the domestic heritage perhaps needs guidelines for new development, which is not altogether banned, but also promoting a better quality design, quality wise and things like that, integrated in the master plan. Am I right in thinking in that fashion, Shominda?
Well, I think, of course, any kind of developmental guidelines are absolutely critical, and I think that needs to take into account, this kind of the real pressures, that we are under, and so therefore, it's not about conservation, i.e., stopping all kinds of development and kind of seizing, because I think the pressures are real in that part of the world. It's not a depopulized population that we are dealing with. We are dealing with increased population pressure, on many of these areas. So I think we've got to think very, very carefully how civic activities and domestic spaces. And I think I mentioned the kind of expanded nature of the domestic space, which is still true even in modern developments in India. So I think it's quite important that those things are maintained as we consider guidelines. So I think it's in all of it, I really, really would like to emphasize that the economic pressures are real, the social pressures are real. If we cannot account for it appropriately, then I think we are going to lose the heritage altogether. So
Right.
I'll stop there.
Yeah. Paul, do you think that the economic conditions of the people who actually hold on to these beautiful traditional landscape, I'm not talking about, I'm convinced that the jute mill could be flagship projects, which could be much more commercial, as Eckhart said. Do you think we need to piggyback on private investment to safeguard our domestic assets?
I think the Hooghly region is extremely big. So you have to be very aware of where you can act and where you can do something and where you have an influence. For what I've seen of India, I'm a bit scared of the word master plan, because I can imagine that's a paper thing and it's very difficult to get from the paper into the practice. But I have more faith in a strategy. And I think for that strategy, I want to make two observations. One is that the public dimension, the big public thing, I think, is the river in the landscape. That's the public space, and that is uniting everything. And it's the narrative. The narrative has to be a public thing as well. And from there on, you can make all kinds of arrangements between public investment, private investment, mixed things, community involvement. You can do whatever you want. That's how I have always looked at the Hampshire region, which Professor Eckhart had shown. It's a beautiful thing. It's the most polluted area in Europe, and you call it a park. That was a brilliant step. And from there, you could integrate all kinds of different efforts and projects and investments. And this park, this concept, this narrative, makes it something bigger. And that is something which worked. And that is, it took a long time, but now you really see it's a park. But it was really an ugly place before. Same for London, where you have the Thames landscape strategy. It's a strategy that made this river be refreshed, and that could be something very productive. Second observation, I think the goal should never be the heritage itself. It is the livability of a region, and that has many different aspects: economy, the happiness of people, looking at communities, all these different things. So if we can manage that, we have a narrative, and we have this public domain, and we have this dream about livability, then you can make all kind of cross connections and make all different projects over time without having all these bureaucratic difficulties which you would have in a master plan situation. There's all the different governments and all the different layers and everybody from different political parties who are mainly fighting each other. The narrative, I think, can break down these borders.
Right. That's. I think it's a very interesting angle. In any way, master plan. The word master plan has died long ago. It's more of a strategy where you kind of evolve your actions as you go by and see how. Now, yesterday's private players are not so untouchables today, as we see. Because they can also know as much about heritage as many of us custodians of heritage. But the issue is how to create enabling strategies for the private players, and how to also at the same time perhaps bind them or bind, not bind, but to make them follow certain framework. I think that otherwise, in a context like a developing context like ours, there can be difficulty. The problem with jute mill locked up spaces are different because it's all owned by private people with an association, and it's the government which can unlock it and put it into a strategic framework of do's and don'ts. or combine, as Eckhart says, Dr. Eckhart said, flagships and non-commercial projects, combining these projects together and bringing those strategies into that framework while allowing private investments, addressing some of the domestic heritage issues through that. Maybe because we are also have to think simultaneously where the money will come from, because that is also perhaps an issue that we need to think about. And I personally feel that grant aids and other aids doesn't really work. They work in creating a lot of reports and plans and things like that, but it never ever created visible sites to appreciate, as we all know. I now open up the chat box. I mean the question and answer, which are some very interesting thing. I was trying to jot them down, and as reading, perhaps you all of us has read some of them, and some of them has also replied. Let me see, I've been writing notes in scribbling notes. Let me see. Let me see. One sec. Yeah.
In the meantime, Manish, Dr. Shika Jain had a hand up.
Okay, please go ahead. Please go ahead while I search my papers.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to make a point that, since we are looking at industrial heritage, and we saw several examples of it being used as public spaces or as reuse, I thought, Manish, it would be good if you also look at some examples where industrial heritage is converted into social housing, especially if in case of India, because housing is an issue. And places like Paris, La Marais, you have very good examples where you can see something like that. So I just thought I'll add that point.
Right. There are a lot of, we discussed quite a number of them. Some of the Aishwarya, excellent presentations, etc. But what came out from most of the, I'll read out a few, which are to me, sounded interesting. Offer opportunities like current topical societal needs other than tourism. How do you, Jaipur, Rajasthan, Paul's presentation? How do I get into this? Right. Somebody says, who will initiate these changes? I think Shumit from one of the participants. Is it like, your typical planning jargon, we say, is it from top down or bottom up, right? Who will initiate these changes? And he addresses this to the trio presenter, Neha, Sen, and Grant. Of course, the developer also says that the Baltimore example seems to him as a developer government driven in terms of land use and overlooking the living heritage. I think we discussed this quite a lot. Mill workers, Shorudeep Bhattacharya says, recognizing intangible heritage and festivals, and to put that into the overall framework and strategy, which is also partly said by Paul and others. But plural identity, collective inclusiveness, identity. I would go with this intangible heritage finding a place in the tangible heritage, or other way around. Would somebody like to answer that? How do you recognize the intangible heritage? and plant them into the framework? Can anybody take this question?
Yes,
I
Dr.
think
Bandyopadhyay is, oh, Dr. Bandyopadhyay is there, Dr. Jain is there.
Right, right. Shikha, would you kind of elaborate, and then Dr. Bandyopadhyay?
Sure. Yeah, Manish, we managed it in Jaipur because, I mean, that is the reason, Jaipur was first, UNESCO Creative City of Crafts and Folk Art, because we realized that the craftspeople in the city are the ones, that is the soul and essence of the city, rather than the built heritage, which is also more celebrated at times or better known internationally. That's why both, the UNESCO Creative City of Crafts and Folk Art, as well as the World Heritage inscription, work in sync together. So there is, when it's built heritage, it's not just the built heritage, it's also the streets where the craftspeople are living, how they are given more incentives, how their status can be upgraded. So I think it's very, very important that we address both of them together, because especially for Indian cities, it's living heritage, it's not tangible and intangible separate. But that's the way the world or even our government addresses it. So sometimes we need to club together schemes or like I mentioned, the inscriptions, to bring it in sync.
Right. Right. Oyun Shen mentioned, Shominda, if you can respond after that, Siddhartha Shen can respond thereafter.
Yeah, just a very brief point, and Shikha's rightly pointed out the need for having this joined up action, and that is very clearly evident in Jaipur. And on the other hand, I think just that how do we actually raise awareness of the various smaller cultural strands, that exist in areas like, across India. And one of the things that, we've been working on is providing a cheaper alternative to kind of museum experience or a virtual experience of a museum, whereby one could use a mobile device to have that experience, because I think that's one thing that I think pretty much every Indian has. And it's possible to actually get a very cheap experience, which can be again rolled out if the back end can be thought through very carefully, then can be rolled out at a much larger scale across a number of smaller cultural institutions. And that I think would be really a good way of bringing intangible cultural aspects into everyday engagement, where that could actually become part of your, while you're traveling on the train or you're, in a bus, and so on and so forth, as well as being in a museum or a cultural place and so on. So I think that opening up of the intangible culture and the awareness and experience would be crucial.
I just wanted to add one thing, like one of the things, and this relates to intangible Hindu cultural heritage, which takes place along the river. Like one is idol immersion. Okay. The other one is what you call Shraddha, Shranti, all those things and pujas that you perform. So we could use them, like, part of the what you call mill sites could become, instead of what you call adding to the water pollution and things of that sort. Some of the sites, I mean, you could have designated sites where you do the idol immersion. There you could have designated sites where this ritual takes place. So that's one way, the very small way of taking advantage, which you call of the riverside and the Hindu religion, which you call rituals, and which is intangible, and which you could proceed with that.
Right.
Those are just
right. There's a question once again from Oyun Shen, who's an urban designer practicing in Kolkata. You mentioned, is there a way to address the issue of multiple government agencies into thinking about a special purpose vehicle for this job, for this entire region, which is once again a very talked about the potential. And contrary to this, there's a PhD researcher from Illinois who talks about talks about the urban development projects, especially where the state and the private sector work together to further commercial potential of the city, lead to violent displacement. So there's a contradiction there, as happened in Commonwealth Games. But exceptions proves that you need to have all kinds of potentials. But Oyon asked a very specific question with regard to a special purpose vehicle, what it is. I mean, is there examples of special purpose vehicle for cities of this nature? Is there examples in America or in Netherlands which can actually take on board the various activities by various departments of the government into a single window kind of situation as an implementation model? Are there examples from your country where such experiments were made? Yeah, Paul, you're muted. Yes, Paul.
I was trying to unmute. We have many examples. I think it's very much about ownership. If one entity feels the ownership, it's very difficult to have others involved. But if you have if you invite other bodies to participate, or you have just working together, then you can have a regional strategy which has local projects to achieve it. For example, projects we do with climate change, so with the raising water levels and water safety, are national projects, but many of them are executed on lower government levels, embedded in the larger context. And that is a very rich experience, but you have to really trust each other and give space, give the floor to other entities to work together. So there should be collective ownership.
And how does it work? I mean, does it work for a business special purpose vehicle that you come, you make business, you make profit and go, we will not say any single word to you? Does it work like that, or?
It has different levels. One is about regulations and the law. Second is about the budget and the money. So if there's an interest and there's federal money, for instance, to be spent with co-financing projects, it can be very much an incentive. But it can also be that a national project can be of benefit for commercial parties to improve the quality of their enterprises. So if they are invited to participate and follow certain guidelines, but do their own thing at the same time, it can be very profitable even without subsidies or loans from the government.
Right, right. We have not gone beyond listing our existing domestic special areas. We have yet not given them any drip. Perhaps the government has not realized that there are a lot of schemes that the government in India do spend. Rajasthan is an exception in the sense that their economy kind of pivots around tourism. But when we're talking about real city like Calcutta or Bombay, then the issue becomes much more multi-layered in terms of people, ethnicity, organizations, and so on. And that where a lot of complexity arises in finding the right model of going about. Shormishta Chatterjee asked a specific question to Shoman Bandyopadhyay. I just read it out because I think
Monish,
yes.
Dr. Sen had his hand up.
Okay,
so.
okay. Dr. Sen, while I read.
I know I commented already. I was talking about the religious rituals and using Hooghly River for that. So I've already, what you call, made my point.
When you traverse around the complex cultural landscape of River Hooghly to Shominda, do you often observe the challenges that have risen due to contested policies here? Because the objective of heritage planning, urban planning, and the desires of politics seems to not align. Yeah. Have you encountered that while you're doing this particular project? And is it that enabled you to think more on co-ops and more on participation?
Yeah, I think I think I did have an answer to that. Yes, and yes, there are a number of other issues which I think surround this, and certainly, the kind of consensual approach to managing the built environment is quite crucial in that. But I think also, if I could raise that there are many of these, because we don't have a unified spatial policy, right? So we do not have spatial strategies that include contemporary development, urban transport, the kind of the socioeconomic changes that are going to be taking place and so on, as well as heritage. So I think that's one thing, and therefore all the decision makers and the kind of the various bodies are working pretty much on their own and developing policies, implementing those, not talking to each other. And this is not unusual even in the West, and I think clearly complicated and made very problematic in the Indian context where there are so many players. And I think that one point, if I can make, is that it goes back to the way that professionals are educated in India. And that's to do with kind of incredibly rigid disciplinary boundaries that are put. So for example, an architect cannot talk about planning because that wouldn't be accepted, and the other way around as well. Whereas in my education in the West, we do in our architecture program, 5 years, we do quite a lot of urban design, quite a lot of complex planning and so on as part of the learning process. It is possible with the right kind of foundation and background to actually look into and cut across these boundaries. That is quite crucial. And I don't think that we have that. And therefore, because from that kind of preparatory perspective, when the basis is when a kind of disciplinary boundaries are created, which actually prevent joined up thinking, that I think creates a problem. So that would be my view, that we need to actually revamp, and perhaps you can do that, Manish, with your new school of architecture, that you can change the way we are thinking about architecture and spatial organization.
Yes, of course. I mean, and I think before there are a lot of more interesting questions, but I think I must say come to an end. Nothing is end. I mean, everything continues. It's like a flow of river, but there's an end to an end. And I would now request, before I request Astrid, hand it over to Astrid, I would say that thank you very much for all of you all who have come. But what is more important is how to take this first comprehensive discussion about not only about getting embedded in the specificity of a particular place in this region, but thinking about a strategy, a regional strategy, sustainability, urban development as opposed to heritage conservation. Not opposed, but it's a development for the education, for the health, for the safety, for the leisure, for the goodwill and quality of life. I think all that came very strongly. Now the issue is how to put this together, because one way of attracting serious attention of the government is to actually do that kind of a document to the and involve the government then and tell them what they perhaps. So we need to perhaps create a lot of initiation papers and initiation small framework within the overall framework. That all that work needs to be done, and we hope to use our university platform at Sister Nivedita, which is a newly formed, very young university. I invite every one of you to this platform, and so that we can collectively work a good strategy and take it to the government, or involve while we are making the strategy with the government, because we need to participate also with the government. And I really don't understand people, government, and private. I think everybody is a government in certain way. With that as a notion, I now request Dr. Astrid to thank everyone and put the conference to a close. Dr. Astrid.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monish. We have to thank Professor Monish Chakraborty for conceiving this outstanding panel and for your excellent moderation. Thank you so much for that. It was really very good to see all the experts bringing in their insights, thoughts, and ideas. I would like to thank all the speakers for your excellent contributions. Dr. Frank Eckert from Germany, Dr. Paul Meurs from the Netherlands, Dr. Shuman Bandyopadhyay from the United Kingdom, Dr. Shikha Jain from India, and Dr. Siddhartha Sen, Dr. Brent Ryan, and Mrs. Neha Doshi from the United States of America. I also would like to thank UNIC Global, the European National Institutes of Culture in Brussels, for their support of the Hooghly Heritage Hub project. And of course, I would also like to thank the backend team, Dana Roy and Anurag Das Sharma, as well as Shorab Jutanjan, who also did the publicity design. I would like to thank my colleagues from Goethe Institute Calcutta, namely Shomishta Sarkar. And last but not least, I would like to thank all those who joined the panel discussion today for your interest, for your questions, for your contributions. As Monish said, it's certainly the end of this discussion or the conference today, but it's definitely not the end of the project and of all the challenges above us. So thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to Monish Chakraborty, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, dear.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye, Paul.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, everybody.